In this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 typical ways that one makes contact with a press and an editor, and then some things to keep in mind about how to interact with and how to approach editors, and in hopes of getting you a book contract. The first and most common one that comes to people's minds are meeting at an annual conference of one or another of the kind of major associations, the one that you belong to. And in this model, which is a very, very common one, what you want to do is this. Assuming that you are going to be attending the conference or speaking at the conference, you will undoubtedly receive well in advance a catalog, whether digital or print, that tells you what are the panels, what's the schedule, and so forth. But in that book, there should be a list of the presses that plan to attend and have a booth at the book fair. This is your opening bit of research that you can do well in advance, months in advance, about which presses will likely be present and therefore which ones you could reach out to in advance to say, hi, my name is, and I'm going to be attending the upcoming conference. And I was wondering if you plan to attend, and if so, if I might take 15 minutes of your time to tell you about my forthcoming book or my book manuscript. Now this brings us to a second related way that you can reach out to editors, and that's likely a question which emerged for you in my first point. How do I know which editor to approach? How do I know their contact information? It doesn't necessarily say in the conference book which editor is actually going to be there from the press. It just says University of Chicago Press is going to be there, or Harvard University Press is going to be there. It doesn't tell you who exactly is going to be there. Well, fortunately for you, there is a tremendously helpful, wonderful organization called the AU Presses, or Association of University Presses. And they publish a telephone and email directory of major university presses and all of the editors and staff who work for that press, categorized by what field they work on and acquire in. In addition to that, this book, which you can purchase, it's a paperback. I think there's a digital version, but it's extremely affordable. I'll include a link in the description below. You also find this extremely easy to use kind of cheat sheet, which shows you along one side all of the different kind of genres of research, African American history, Asian American history, anthropology, art history, whatever it might be. And then along the other side, I guess the columns or the rows, I forget which one, it lists all of the university presses or presses featured in the book. And then it puts some sort of symbol inside the cell telling you, yes, this press publishes in this field, or no, this press doesn't publish in this field. But more importantly, is it has the names of the acquiring editors, the acquisition editors in your field and their email addresses. Now, you don't want to carpet bomb everybody and shotgun these emails out. It's not a resource that's meant to be abused, but it is one that you can use surgically and say, okay, I see that these 10 presses or 5 presses are coming to the American Historical Association in 4 months, once we're post-COVID again. And I'm going to write to the acquisition editors in the relevant fields and reach out to them and try to set up a 15-minute coffee down in the basement area where the book fair will be. A third way that people meet editors is when you give an invited talk or are part of a panel or some sort of event at a university that has an associated university press. This is to say, if you give a talk at Columbia, there is a greater than 0 chance that the acquiring editor or an acquisition editor from that press or someone within the press might attend that particular talk or conference or so forth and be in the audience. Same thing for Yale or Harvard or Princeton or wherever you might be, Michigan. And so one thing that you can do is kind of be on the lookout for editors in the audience, especially during the Q&A or if you're having conversations over coffee afterwards. Or, and this is the more intelligent option, you can use that Association of University Presses guidebook and say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna be giving a talk at the University of Hawaii in 6 months. I've already been invited. It's a 45-minute talk. I'm gonna really bring something great. Why don't I find out who the acquisition editor at the press is, because I'm really interested in it, I love what they do, and write to them and say, hi, my name is, I'm giving a talk in such and such time. First of all, I was hoping you might be able to attend the talk, But in addition, I'm wondering whether or not you have 30 minutes for coffee, because I'd love to tell you about the book that I'm working on right now. That is a wonderful way that a lot of people forget about. A lot of people do not reach out to editors during talks at universities when they should. Because in fact, the editors in those situations, if they're in town, is far more relaxed, has more time. They're not running around like a headless chicken meeting with thousands of other would-be aspiring authors for them. So it can actually be a great way to meet them when they're a bit more focused and can focus on you. A fourth way that people meet with editors is the flip, is the inverse of this. And this is that every so often, I don't really know how often, the acquisition editors at various presses will kind of do tours, they'll visit all of their markets, let's say. So the way this typically happens is that oftentimes if you're more of an established author, someone that they know and that they are interested in, you might get an email out of the blue saying, "Hi, I'm from this university press. I admire your work. I'm coming through, in my case, I'm going to visit Stanford and Berkeley, and I'm visiting all these various UC schools, and I'm wondering whether or not you have time to sit down and chat." So this isn't something that a lot of early career scholars, unless they've really made a name for themselves, pre-first book scholars tend to be targeted. Rather, I think it's more people that are known quantities tend to be targeted. But what you can do is in your department, let's say, or wherever you teach, you can start to seed the ground by talking to your own colleagues, especially sort of mid-level or higher, mid-career, later career scholars, and say, hey, I'm working on this book and I'm considering different presses. And if you're so bold and you're really friends with this person, like they're a mentor, just reach out to them and say, should you, I hear that editors every now and then visit campus, and if one ever reaches out to you and you recommend that they also meet with me during their visit, I would be so grateful. What harm is there in just asking a senior colleague to think of you when the editor writes to them because they're big and famous, and then they say, sure, I'll have coffee with you. Oh, and by the way, while you're here, I really recommend that you get coffee with my junior colleague so-and-so because their work is awesome. A fifth way, which is abstract and is you can't really engineer it, but it is important, is through your social network, by which social media network. I would say that most of the editors I know have a really heavy presence in Twitter, especially, and probably other social media platforms as well, to the extent that you can start to develop presence on Twitter in particular. I think Twitter is particularly useful for this. Then your exposure increases to presses and to editors, meaning it is very possible to get noticed by presses and by publishers by way of your activity on social media. If you're like the go-to person for a series of questions and issues, if you really seem to have insightful commentary, people notice this. Not only university presses and editors, but also editors at more public-facing journals and magazines and newspapers. I have posted a tweet in the past that got some traction, and then get a DM from someone at a magazine or saying, would you consider writing this up for us? Something like that. Now, it doesn't happen every day, but if I wasn't on Twitter and if I hadn't posted that particular tweet, I would not have been approached by this person, and I wouldn't have thought to approach them. Now, the other thing that is a very, very kind of controversial subject, it's been at the center of a few different kind of storms in a teacup, kind of Twitter swarmy kind of dealios, is the question of whether or not someone has to have a large Twitter following or social media presence in order to be considered seriously by presses. I think that this is a load of bullshit. I don't think that presses will discount a potential author because they're not on Twitter or only have 100 followers or 500 followers or something of this nature. I have never met an editor for whom that is a metric, but let's face reality here. If you are one of these scholars, I'm not one of them, but if you're one of these scholars that has like 20,000 followers on Twitter, if you're like a public intellectual basically on Twitter, and every time you post about some relatively esoteric subject, the internet lights up, I mean, let's face it, the presses are going to take notice of that because, as everyone knows who has ever published a book with a university press, you are the most important marketer for your book. Yes, there's a sales and marketing team at most presses, at all presses, but they have a lot on their shoulders. They've got whatever budget they have. and no one cares about your book as much as you do. And so yes, it undoubtedly goes through the subconscious reptilian brain of editors. Holy shit, not only is this author like on the cutting edge of X, Y, or Z, but look at this presence that they have. You take those two things together, and that's very exciting. So those are the 5 ways I think that most people meet editors. Now, here are some things you want to keep in mind when you are interacting. The first thing is I want you to reconsider this idea of pitching something to an editor or your elevator talk. There's all of this kind of, to me, it's a little bit off-putting language, which suggests that meeting with an editor is a little bit like, I don't know, Live at the Apollo or the Gong Show, where they're just gonna like boo you off stage or hit the gong or whatever in this, and that you're kind of up there doing your juggling act, you know, you're singing, and it's a little like America's Got Talent, whatever. I don't think that that's actually what it's about. So if you have this super scripted, rehearsed thing that feels really unnatural, no matter how interesting it is, I don't think that's the right way you want to go. What you want to do, I think, and this takes a lot of practice, but figure out the most effective and most direct way of infecting your listener's mind with the problem that you have in your own mind, in your own body, in your own heart when it comes to this research. You wrote this book because there's something about the book and about the subject matter, about the questions there, that disturb you, that bother you, that keep you up at night. That's why you, as an intelligent person, are drawn to this. Well, you've got like this poison in your system, and you can't, you know, you've got it in you. Well, your job is to spread it. Your job is to infect another person, disturb them, make your problem their problem, and make them have a sleepless night that night in the hotel thinking, oh man, I had a conversation with this person in the book fair, and like I can't get that problem out of my mind. So what I'm getting at here is that this is not about getting up there and juggling. It's actually a much more human-to-human interaction, speaking to the person as an intelligent, you know, interlocutor, and just honestly knowing how to get right to the heart of the problem, the heart of the matter that disturbs you. And so a few things to keep in mind is the editor doesn't inherently care about the time, place, or actors and historical agents in your work. So if you are going blah, 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 blah about all of the case level stuff about your problem, then maybe you'll convey the problem to that person, but chances are you won't, and it'll seem very descriptive and might perhaps interesting, but not disturbing. You need to do some soul searching and figure out, why would anyone care about the book I wrote if they did not care about the place or the time period or, you know, the historical agents I deal with? What is the problem in my book? Were I an historian or an anthropologist of some other place and time, would probably, you know, still be there in my book, even though the book was about a whole different set of time periods and actors and so forth. The way I like to think about it, and this is the same thing for how to give a good talk, is that you want to figure out how to walk into this room and more or less say to the editor, hi, nice to meet you. Oh, by the way, I just poisoned the coffee you're drinking, and now you have this poison, and I have the antidote. And the poison is the problem. The poison is what, like, they can't get out of their system, the question that you have just posed to them. And you also have the antidote, which is your book. Your book is the only thing that will cure them of this poison that you have kind of infiltrated. Now, I'm sorry for the sort of, you know, James Bondy kind of imagery here, but the idea here is that this is actually a process of trying to make the problem that bothers you bother them. That's the first thing. The second thing you want to keep in mind is that editors have extremely long memories and time frame, kind of time scales in their mind. I'm not saying that they all have like prodigious memory and that they can like remember what they did on Tuesday, you know, in April in 1983, nothing like that. What I mean is this. If you meet someone at a bar and they say to you, oh yeah, it was really wonderful meeting you. If you come back around here in 2 years, look me up. That's like a way that someone in normal life blows you off, because no one's going to remember you in 2 years, and it's kind of a polite way of saying, I'm not interested. If you're talking with an editor and they seem interested, and then they say, you know, okay, so when are you thinking that you'll be finished with this, or you'll be ready to submit it somewhere? And you say, probably like 2 years. If they say, well, please keep in contact, I'd be really interested in talking to you in 2 years, they're not lying. They're not blowing you off. Because in 2 years' time, if and when you write back to that person, they will quickly look you up and look up their notes, and they will remember you. Like, they are used to those kinds of timescales, and the reason is very simple. It takes a long time to write a book, so they have to have that kind of timescale because their authors require that kind of timescale. The second reason they have that timescale is because people are overdue all the time. People blow deadlines all the time, and people submit their final books years after they promised it. And so editors just naturally have this time scale that pretty much no one else in our profession has. So know that when they say, look me up in 1.5 years or in 2 years, they mean it. They mean it. You should take that at face value, and that's a very good sign. So now you have to remember to put that somewhere in your notes so you don't forget that in 2 years' time, you should probably make contact with this editor again. Now, third, and this is related to this question of when will your book be ready, my recommendation would be to fudge that number a little bit, but not too much. If you, let's say, just finishing your PhD and, let's say you've got a postdoc, or universe willing, you have a job, it's kind of silly for you to say to an editor at one of these book fairs or one of these conferences, oh, I think it'll be ready in 6 months. It would even be silly to say, oh, I think it'll be ready in 1 year. There is basically a snowball's chance in hell that you are going to change your dissertation into a book while starting a position, while moving, while figuring out your new colleagues, all that stuff. Like, that's not a realistic kind of thing. You might have to do further research, a lot of editing perhaps. 1 year is unlikely. 6 months is impossible. And so why do we lie? We lie because, again, we're worried that if we give a number that's too big, that the editor will say, oh, well, that's too long from now. I have a short attention span, and no, I'm not interested. But as I just discussed, that's not true. If you say to an editor, I think that I'll have the manuscript ready for formal review probably in 2 years, they would say, sounds great. Please look me up when the time comes, and I'd love to carry on this conversation. That's fine. And again, they mean it. So there's no reason to completely lie and say, oh, I can have it to you in a few months, because all that's going to happen is that you'll get to that point and you'll have to write an embarrassing message and say, I don't have it. And they'll understand, but, might as well skip that step. At the same time, you don't want to say like, I'll have it in 10 years or I'll have it in 5 years. First of all, your career probably can't sustain that. You want to move on to more other projects, you're coming up for review, whatever it might be. But I would say you want to fudge a little bit. You want to give an optimistic timeline, but just don't make it unrealistically optimistic. That would be my recommendation. The most important thing of all is that you should always get permission prior to actually sending anything. So let's say that you see the conference bulletin, you see that a press is coming, you write to the editor, and you are going to ask if they're going to be there. For the love of God, do not include any attachments to that email, and don't make the email too long. They haven't given you any permission, they haven't expressed any interest, and it would be a big faux pas to just assume and start attaching things and loading down their inbox. It's not a professional thing to do. But of course, after you've heard back from them, or if they express any interest, or certainly after you've met with them and they say, yeah, I'd like to see, is there anything that you can share with me that I might be able to take a look at? Then by all means, that's when you have the green light to start sharing and sending things. But in general, before you've reached a certain kind of level of intimacy with the editor, avoid any too long didn't read emails, and by all means, avoid all file attachments. You haven't reached that stage of the relationship. Okay, so that's my advice for you. If you have some advice, I would love to hear it and love to share it with people on this channel. So put it in the comments field below. If you got something out of this video, be sure to give it a like, and it would mean a great deal to me if you'd consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.